Right, mate. I want to talk to you about the Andy Rowe show because, as I said before, coming on air, I was a bit late
Go
to the
on.
party, but I've been really enjoying it. The stuff that you had with the guy from Game Changers, I thought was brilliant. I got a chance to listen to that today. So how did
Oh,
the Andy?
nice. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Mate, I really genuinely enjoy it. I'm not even just saying that because you're here. Because, like I said, I got in contact with you
Nice.
just to talk to you about your interviews before I even asked you to come on here. But
All right. Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
how did
Nice.
the Andy
Cool.
Rowe
That's
show
good to
come
hear
about?
positive feedback.
Yeah, how did the Andy Rowe show come
Um,
about?
I when you listen to the rugby pod,
Mm.
you would notice that my role on there is very much um, taking a back seat, letting other people interview,
Yeah.
letting other people speak. And it
Mhm.
wasn't always the case. When I was talking about earlier that I wanted to be a sports reporter and you hosting shows and commentating games and all that kind of stuff, that was always my goal, and to have my own show. And there's a certain way and a certain type of person that it takes to host a show, and they've got to be like really upbeat. They've got to be this. They've got to be that. And there's like a mold that people have got to fit, and a style that people have got to aspire to become a certain type of broadcaster to host a radio show. So when I was on the, and I was always, that was what I was always going to do. And then with the rugby pod, I was kind of um, started off like that. And then the more I realized my role in the show was not to bring the information, it was to get the information.
Yeah.
It was to facilitate. It wasn't to be the star of the show. You don't need to be the star of the show to be effective in hosting a
Mhm.
show. Sometimes that's your, like when people, I was very like aware that people didn't want to hear what I had to say when it came to all things rugby on the rugby shows. Like I never played for England or Scotland. Goody and Jim did.
Mhm.
So I learned how to interview and how to ask and I learned my style and my craft. I honed it in 5 years working on the rugby pod. So what I wanted to do is exploit that craft by starting my own show. And the reason why I called it the Andy Rowe Show was because media is a thing about branding, right? Like
Yeah.
if you want to do well in media, people got to know your name. And I knew that
I'm
my
debating changing the name of
interviews
my
wouldn't.
podcast
Well,
now.
it depends. You might not. You can let me finish here. So like, yeah. So I knew that my interviews were
Mhm.
not going to be about my personality. I knew that they were going to be all about the person that's on the other end of the mic, the person that I'm interviewing. And I knew that if I could do that, then I could create a good show. I could create what is essentially the same sort of format that you've got in the rugby pod, but with a different person each week, that's talking about a different topic, that's talking about a different life. And if I could keep that same format and get the same out of these other guests, then I could create something that would be successful. And so that's what I did, and it's worked. Like it's the feedback that we get is epic. Like the press that we're starting to get is amazing. And the guests that are coming on, like it all just comes down to the guests. And if the guest is great, then as long as I've done my research, we're going to get a good podcast every single time.
Mhm. No, you're doing a beautiful. I feel like you've got my notes because you're doing a beautiful, good job of segueing. Because I was going to discuss to you the troubles and the difficulties of hosting a podcast, and you've reached it perfectly. So how do you find? What do you find most difficult about doing a podcast? Because I'm think we might be the same. I definitely find getting a guest is the most difficult part of a podcast.
Yeah, yeah, it can be like in the beginning, it definitely is because um, you're getting a lot of you get a lot of no's. You get people saying no, or but then I think the research that I do is quite difficult as well. Like I
Mhm.
know that my point of difference in a podcast is not going to be um, because I'm funny. It's not going to be because I can tell a story. It's not going to be, my personality is not going to be the thing that makes my podcast better than everyone else's. That's not going to ever be my point of difference. I'm not saying that I can't tell a story. I haven't got a personality, or I can't tell a funny joke from time to time, but there's so many more people out there that are going to be way better at it than me, and they're not just going to be better at it, they're going to be amazing at it. So give up that fight sometimes and say, that's not me. That's not where I'm going to win. Where I'm going to win is by outworking people and out researching people. And that's the hard part, is creating the time and giving up the time to do the research. And that, you're talking about, like, for 30 minutes content, it might be 12 hours research just to find all the best stuff. So that I think that can be the hard part, but it's also the fun part. It's also the bit that I enjoy a lot as well, because you're like, oh my god, I've got some good stuff here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I completely agree. There's nothing more satisfying than when you're doing your research and you get that little nugget. Because I don't know, because I'm quite lucky, and a lot of my guests haven't really had the exposure of podcasts, so like a lot of their story was pretty unknown. But I can imagine for yourself, when you get these guests on, like, you find that one nugget, you think, I've never heard him talk about that before, and anything I've heard him talk about. And then, like you say, it creates that little golden nugget of content where you get people like me messaging you going, that story was really good, I really like that bit.
Yeah, it's just about, like, trying to find all the stuff you can find to read about that person, and finding out what they know, what they're good at talking about, what topics that they're really good on, and that kind of stuff. And that's well, for me, that's what I think the key is. Whether it is or not, I don't know, but that's what I feel like it is, and that's what that's my point of difference. Like I said, like, there's always going to be a funnier person. There's always going to be a better storyteller, but I can't imagine anyone's going to outwork me when it comes to research ever.
Exactly. There's only one Andy Rowe, so that's you, fine. There you go.
I wish there were more sometimes to help me do a bit more research.
Just need a team. Just 2 or 3 would be grand.
Exactly.
Right. So what made you decide to have the podcast? Because obviously you come from the sports background, you come from the rugby pod. Was it a conscious objective to make the Andy Rowe show not sports-based?
Yeah, it was. It was. Sorry.
Mate, I'm the same. I'm roasting. My sunlight. The sun is directly in front of my window, so I'm roasting.
Mate, you look like you're melting.
I'm just Scottish.
Yeah. So it was a conscious decision to stay away from rugby.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been offered rugby guests to go on the Andy Rowe show, but it's not. I want to really step away from that genre to try and find stuff that I'm interested in. About, like, there's so many more things that are interesting than just talking about rugby and talking about sport. And I find I've worked as a sports reporter, as I said, for so long, that I didn't want to get stuck in doing that as well, because there's loads of people getting interviewed about sports stuff all the time. I'd never rule out a sports person or a rugby person, but I do actively try and stay away from where I can. It just kind of depends on the person as well. If you've got someone that's like amazing talent, that's real good chat and got some awesome stories, then you're not just going to say no to them on the basis that they play rugby or play another sport. But I just thought there's just so many topics out there that are interesting enough to not have to focus on sport.
No, I agree, because I very much, when I made this in mind, that's why I get people like you, and I've had Bruce on, and I had sports journalist Matt Hardy. I had people like, because what people see is there's so much that goes on, like you'll know yourself, there's so much accessories to sport rather than just the people that play the sports in the field, ring, match, equestrian centre, or whatever it is in the pool. and then like you said, is you're so conscious to try and get them, but then as you're starting out, I didn't know whether you would do a few to get the ball rolling, because I just from people I know, I've definitely found it easier to get rugby guests on because I don't know anybody in any other sports. So what I'm saying is I'm very impressed you've managed to get such a diverse set of guests on straight away, because I've got a lot of Instagram messages that are left unread. This is just seen and not replied. I'm like, oh well.
What you have?
Yeah, I've got a few of just seen.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I just felt that if there was a good rugby player, we could interview them on the rugby pod, couldn't we? So, and I wanted to sort of set a standard. If they're not good enough to go on the rugby pod, then they probably weren't going to be good enough to go on my show. Why? You know, if the goal is to have the number one podcast, you've got to try and set that standard as early as you can, and have the number one guests. And that's, I think we've done a pretty good job of that. The team's done a really good job of that, and you know, we're continuing to get really good people that are interested in chatting to us. So that we haven't had to talk to rugby people yet. Not ruling them out. Like, if there's a good one, we'll have a chat to them.
Have you ever had a episode that you've done yet where you just thought, either I want to reshoot this because it didn't feel that good to me, or have you ever had an episode and just gone, this is a bit shit, I'm just going to bin it?
Yeah, we've got a few. I think there's probably about 3 of them that we're just sitting there that we haven't used. I'm not going to name them, but like, you know, there was one person that you know, it was quite a big name. Like everyone would know who the person is. I did so much research. So I did it worked out to be over 24 hours of research. So I'm not saying I just did a day researching. It was over 24 hours of research for this interview. And then it came on, like just before the interview, I got an email from his publicist saying, oh, you've only got 3/4 of an hour with him now. I'm like, shit, okay. He comes on, and it just like, it just didn't flow. It was just a bit awkward. And I did the interview, got a couple of good bits, but like, it just wasn't up standard. So we didn't use it. And then another time, like, I read this guy's book. I read this book about this guy who was shot down during the Iraq War, the Gulf War, a couple of years, like in the early 90s. And so read his book. We read 2 of his books, actually, and we got him on the podcast, and he was late. Right, we had a 1 hour slot with him, and he was late. And then he came on, and he was just real. He was like, "Oh, is this going to be for radio, or is this going to be visual as well?" I was like, "We're recording the Zoom, and so it's going to be visual, and for podcasts, it's going to be both." So I'll go get changed. Then it storms off, goes gets changed, comes down, and then I started asking the questions about his book, and he's like, I don't want to talk about the book. I'm like, what? Okay. He's like, I don't want to talk about the book. I don't want to go through what happened in the book. I'm like, well, that's what we've done. The research is all on the book. He's like, yeah, well, I made it really clear I didn't want to talk about the book. I was like, you didn't make it. You didn't make it clear you didn't want to talk about the book. I was like, what the hell am I talking? Why does he think I'm interviewing him? So I ended up, like, he was quite disrespectful. So I ended up saying, like, I think you've been a bit disrespectful to me and my team. Like, we've done a lot of research on you. We've read all your books, and I'm just going to end the interview. So ended the interview. I later found out that through other people that were that had worked with him before, that he already had a reputation of being a bit prickly anyway. But it was just really disappointing that I felt like crying afterwards. Like I was so gutted because it's like, what, like, why would he come on? Why would he come on the podcast if he talk like what does he think he's famous for?
I was going to say,
What does he
what did
think
he want
he's?
to talk
What
about?
does he think anyone? There's nothing. I don't know the guy apart from his book.
Yeah.
And his book publicist had organised the interview. I'm like, what do you want to talk about, mate? Like, what's anyway? So that didn't work out. Another couple like that I've done interviews for where I've you know the interview's just been good, but it hasn't been good enough. You get to the end of the interview and you think it's all right. And I've got two other people that edit all my interviews. So I do the research, I do the interview, and then I give it to my producer to edit, and then he edits it, and then someone else edits it. So I kind of wash my hands of it in a way that allows us to be objective about the interviews that we release and interviews that we don't. Because if I've done all that research, I'll be attached to wanting to share my work. I've done so much work, I want to share it. So it's really important that you have people that are objective at the end of the process that can say, I didn't actually get much out of that. People like the guys that I really respect their decisions, and they'll make calls, that I might not like them, but at the end of the day, like if they don't like something, then no one's going to like it.
I quite like that. I like that takes a lot of like you said, just like mental toughness as well to be like, because I assume you obviously get the final say if this is going out or if it's not, but people come to but to have the
no, not really. It's really collaborative. You've got to. I think it's really important to make sure that people do know that their opinions are valid and taken on board, and if we're in it together, like if we've all got a shared interest in it being successful, then you've got to value other people's opinions, and especially when deep down that you want to release something because you put so much work into it, then you have to be able to kind of step away a little bit and go, that's why I want it to go out.
Yeah.
And trust in other people's opinions. That, like, you're not always going to bow down to other people's opinions. You could still push it, but it's not like I've ever said that someone else was wrong about whether something should go out or not. I'm always on board with what they say.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get across. The mental toughness to go, right, well, you two are, well, you might not be correct, but you two, I value your opinion enough to go, right, close the book on that. We'll just chuck it to the side and we'll start something else and we'll go again. Well,
it's a weapon, isn't it? It's a weapon to make sure that your standards are always high. Mm-hmm. It's knowing that you can be objective about everything and not be too attached to stuff that you just want to push it out because you think it's all right. Like I think it's what makes our podcast like so successful is that we've got people that will say that's not good enough. Mm-hmm. And if people are right often enough, then you kind of just back the decision. But I think it's a massive weapon that we've got, is that it is collaborative, and people will let you know where they stand on the content in our team, and that's really, really important. I think it makes us really strong.
Yeah, no, I mean, your podcast is case in point. I've not listened to one that I've thought's not up to scratch yet, so they're still doing all right.
Oh, there's a couple.
if you get a text me going, not sure about minutes 220 through 33 in this one, but no, I wouldn't be that harsh because you'd come back to mine with a fine tooth comb and go, I'm not sure about episodes 1 through 10, which would be impressive as I'm on episode 8. So
yeah. No, I wouldn't I wouldn't. I'm doing too much time researching. You know.
I like that. Oh, man, any feedback is good feedback. As long as it's constructive, any feedback is good feedback in my book. So